The Joe Rogan Experience.
Train by day, Joe Rogan Podcast by night, all day.
The apocalypse has always been on us. It's always the case that the future has the possibility of being dreadful. But, we've conquered terrible things in the past and overcome massive obstacles, and there's no reason at all not to assume that we can do the same thing.
That's a very important point.
Well, yeah.
It's such an important point because there's never been a time ever where everything was perfect.
Well, that's for sure.
There's never been a time ever environmentally where the earth was stable.
No.
If you go, stable, currently you can kind of like guess what the weather's going to be. But if you look at like models of like thousands of years, it's never been flat. It's always been up and down, heats up.
Well, the earth was
freezes.
an ice ball many times.
Yeah, many times.
Yeah, so well.
Randall Carlson was saying there's been times in our like distant past where the CO2 levels and the oxygen levels were so fucked up that we were close to losing all life on Earth.
Right.
And then this can happen.
See, the antithesis to that is to believe in something like the intrinsic paradisal stability of well-balanced Mother Nature.
Right.
It's like, yeah, a bit, but no, not really. There's a lot of variability, and of course, that kind of variability, that's hard on people because you want a certain amount of stability so you don't die.
Right, but it doesn't deny that human beings have an impact on this either.
But no. Well, this is why I really respect Bjorn Lomborg, because Lomborg's hard to grasp because he forces you to think complexly. He says, well, we don't have one problem, carbon dioxide, which is, I don't even think it's clear that carbon dioxide is actually a problem, but we can leave that aside. That'll get me in trouble with the College of Psychologists again. But, Lomborg says,
it's a factor.
It's a factor. Yeah. But there's lots of factors, and God only knows what the most pressing problems that confront us truly are. When I wandered through the ecological sustainability literature about 10 years ago, and, I concluded a couple of things. One was that the best way forward to a sustainable planet is to make everyone who's poor rich as fast as you possibly can.
And that's Lomborg's position,
not
too.
To put limits to growth on, because it turns out if you get people above about $5,000 a year in average GDP, they start taking a long-term view of the future instead of scrabbling around in the dirt trying to get lunch, and you're going to burn everything up around you to stay alive if you have to.
Right.
But if you got a bit of wealth and now you can think over maybe a 20-year period, which is quite the damn luxury, then you actually start being concerned about, the quality, the aesthetic quality of the local environment. And so I was so excited when I found that data because I thought, this is so cool. It means that we could have our cake and eat it too. We could work really hard to provide cheap, reliable energy at the lowest cost possible to the widest number of people worldwide. And the emergent consequence of that would be the whole planet would clean itself up. So wouldn't that be great? Because we could make our goal the eradication of absolute poverty, which we actually done pretty good at eliminating over the last 15 years, but we could really make that a goal. And then one of the consequences of that, inevitable consequences, would be a greener and healthier planet. And then you think, well, why aren't we doing that? And that's a question, all right. And I think part of the reason is I've been trying to understand the driving ideas underneath this globalist utopian tyranny that seems to be developing from the top down. And I think it's driven at least in part by this religious vision that I already described, that you have to construe culture itself, especially industrial culture, as the tyrannical father raping and pillaging everything in its way, which is an unbelievably dangerous way to think, too one-sided. And the idea that you have to impose limits to growth on people in order to have a sustainable planet. And that's allied with a view that probably stems all the way back to people like Paul Ehrlich in the 1960s, who really believe, truly, that maybe the planet should only have 500 million people on it, or 1 billion, in relative poverty, or 2 billion barely scraping by, because otherwise they're going to be wrecking everything, and controlled by some top-down authority that makes bloody well sure that no one's consuming too much. And so when I look at ideas like that first assumption, the planet has too many people on it, it's like, I don't like to hear people say that, because when I hear that, I think, okay, buddy, who exactly are you thinking about getting rid of? Oh, well, it's not like that. It's like, yeah, it's like that.
It has to be like that.
It is absolutely like that. And so, it's easy to get all paranoid conspiracy theorist about the WEF, say, and maybe there's some utility in that, but I don't think anybody's sitting at Davos going, well, we got to scrap 7 billion people. But if the underlying narrative is the one I just described, virginal planet, tyrannical patriarchy, and rapacious individual, and you believe, well, we're overpopulated, like Paul Ehrlich has believed since really literally the mid-1960s, then how is it not going to be that the policies that you craft stemming from that narrative are colored by the belief that there's far too many people? And I've really felt that I've been at war for the last 6 months. And I would say it's war because what I observed happening in Europe when I was there last was that, well, and you can see this, you don't have to be in Europe to see it, but it's more direct if you're there, is that it's pretty damn clear that the globalist utopians are willing to sacrifice the poor for the sake of the planet. And they're doing that by cranking energy prices up through the roof, and that means that people die. Lomborg has estimated that maybe you have to turn your thermostat down by 3 degrees, right? Save the planet. We don't have enough energy. We'll pay you not to use your electricity between 5 and 6, which is what they're doing in the UK. You turn your damn thermostat down 3 degrees, that sounds like nothing. But if you're old, that radically increases the probability that you'll get a respiratory disease and die. And if the Europeans would have had a cold winter, and that could still happen, Lomborg estimated it'd wipe out 135,000 people. It's like, well, we're just making energy more expensive. It's like, what do you mean you're just doing that? So imagine the economic system. It's a pyramid. There's a bunch of people at the top. They have almost all the money. That's par for the course for any productive system. Any system that's productive ends up with a distribution like that. It's like a law of nature. And then you move farther down the pyramid till you get down to the bottom where most of the people are, and they're barely clinging on to the edge of reality, right? It doesn't take much of a crisis to tip them into, death. And then you crank up energy prices. Well, what happens is you just take a bunch of those people at the bottom of the distribution, the poor that the left is so, hypothetically concerned with, and they're just done. They go from barely hanging on to not hanging on. And their kids go from having some ghost of a chance of opportunity to having none. And I could see this coming. You really saw it happening in Germany and the UK, where we have this absolute rat's nest of way more expensive energy. And this is where it gets extremely perverse. You might say, okay, look, we have to save the future poor. And so now some of the present poor are going to have to suffer. Well, that's convenient for you if you happen not to be one of those poor people, but let's give the devil his due and say, okay. It's like, that'd be fine with me. Not really.